Hi, everyone. My name is Josh Fost. The next 3 talks are going to be about education. I think you know this. Then there's a panel about education. I'm the first talk, so I'm just going to kick it off right now. By the way, I might be at the wrong conference because you all seem to be optimists. This might be a bit of a buzzkill. We'll see how it goes over. So it's sometimes interesting to ask the opposite of the question that you're trying to answer. This can be instructive. So instead of asking, how can we make human society sustainable, I'd like to ask, is human society necessarily unsustainable? Is there something intrinsic about human psychology and our group mind that is going to lead to our own demise? So a little bit more poetically, is human civilization suicidal? Well, yes or no? If you think the answer is yes, then what course of action can you pursue? And sort of not much, right? It's rearranging chairs on the deck of the Titanic. You just sort of get ready, you try to make things the least bad they can be on the downhill slope. I don't know if many of you have this persuasion, but maybe we can find out. Now, if the answer is no, if you think the answer is no, what potential courses of action could you take? One is to re-engineer the human mind so as to change our unsustainable ways. That's something you could try to do. Another thing you could try to do would be to invent some kind of super intelligent AI to serve in loco parentis and do the things that we can't. And I think sometimes people underestimate this in a sort of Terminator kind of way. Presumably, any sentient AI would have an ethical and very inclusively ethical calculus built into it. So I think that's actually a live possibility. A third thing you might try to do is to close the loop on all energy and materials flows and solve all the problems of distributive justice before the plane crashes into the mountain. So I think, by the way, these are not mutually exclusive. You could do one or more of these at the same time. Roughly speaking, this is what I think. This is what I work on. This is what I dream about. And this is what I think most of you are working on, and I hope you succeed. I really, really do, and good luck. This is why it's important that they're not mutually exclusive. So for the past 10 years, I have been working on the re-engineering project, and I just want to spend a moment telling you about what I have tried. So the first thing I've tried is what we might summarize as the "you're all idiots" approach. That's not really meant to be a joke. The purpose of this strand is to teach people about human fallibility. We are very flawed creatures. We tend to give too much credence to the things we believe. So this strand is about giving people some kind of cognitive immune system to help them avoid confirmation bias, to understand flaws in human reasoning, teach them about how haphazard our ethical and value systems really can be, and give them some kind of tools to recognize these flaws in themselves and improve upon them. So I've tried that. Another approach I've tried is the being smart is fun approach. So the first one is basically a critical thinking curriculum. This next one is more of a creative thinking curriculum. It's about providing students with the know-how, the actual skills, some kind of executive capacity, and other creative thinking skills that help them turn their ideas and their visions into real things. Now, just a brief mention, there's an interesting interaction effect between the second one and the first one. In particular, I don't think we should teach the second one to people who don't understand the first one. It is quite a dangerous thing to provide people with the engines to actually get things done if they can't discern fact from non-fact. And I'm thinking specifically of the United States here. I won't get into politics too much, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. The third approach that I've tried is what you might call the life is amazing approach. The idea here is to celebrate the glory of the natural world, the beauty of the products of human culture, and generally just try to instill in students a kind of value and an appreciation and passion for the world that's so overwhelming that they can't not try to save it. So it's an emotional connection, whereas the first two are more intellectual. So I think all three of these things have to find their way somehow into education for the 21st century. Any kind of thoroughgoing, deep skills and values approach probably needs to address, not in the way that I've summarized it on the left, but fundamentally these skills, recognizing your own fallibility, giving us new kinds of executive capacities and project management skills and so on, so we can actually turn our ideas into real-world effects, and an appreciation for what it is that we're trying to save. So that's a sort of an outline. That's what I've tried. As far as I know, my students have not saved the world yet, but I do think these are critical components of any kind of 21st century education. So what does that actually look like in more structure? Well, in the United States, we have something called the Common Core, but the basic idea is it's a framework that any elementary school education has to meet. So what would be the components in this view of a new Common Core? Well, first of all, there's domain competence. You know, if you're going to be an engineer or something like that, there are certain things you have to know how to do. I think traditional education is actually doing this reasonably well. We have trained doctors, we have trained scientists and engineers and musicians. That could be done better, but it's not terrible. Another thing that I think needs to be part of the curriculum is a sort of cognitive habits program. It's not explicit knowledge, it's how you act and sort of what your reflexive cognitive processes are in any situation. And then the third piece is a character and values part. Now, the cognitive habits piece can encompass a wide variety of things, a commitment to empiricism, a kind of intellectual humility. These are sort of, you might think of these as character traits. I think they are that. But they're also intellectual skills. And at Minerva, where I work, we've developed a very structured approach to this that we teach over 4 years and test students on repeatedly throughout that whole span. In fact, we have a Minerva student here. You can talk to him about it. So you have to be very transparent about what those things are you're trying to teach and how you measure them, but I think that needs to be that needs to spread more broadly through education. And then the third piece of this ostensible Common Core is a kind of character and values piece. This, to me, is the biggest challenge for higher education in the 21st century. I have not seen, really in higher education, or really anywhere in the United States writ large, K-12 education, a real appetite for teaching people values. I think it's understood that this will just somehow happen through their families or some kind of cultural tradition or something like that, and I don't think it's working. So, you know, there's just a handful of examples here. Clearly, we are terrible temporal discounters. We do not think about long-term effects at all well. We need to solve that. We're not going to make much progress if people can't even, can't think 20 years in the future. We need people to be more conscientious, and the moral sphere needs to be larger. Moral sphere has 3 dimensions: time, space, and difference, right? This world is not going to work if people only care about other human beings who are dressed like them in a 10-foot radius. That is not going to work. We need people to care about non-human beings thousands of miles away 1,000 years from now, right? That has to happen. And this is, to me, the biggest challenge for higher education. If education, not just higher education, education. And if education is not going to do this, who is? I don't know. I'm not sure that education is the right home for it, but somebody needs to do it. And by the way, I think it needs to be consistent globally. I'm deeply troubled and confused about how this is going to happen. But I think it does have to happen. So, just a few words about some trends. Oh, by the way, this needs to happen longitudinally. It needs to start young when brains are plastic. It needs to extend in a consistent way and have a longitudinal thread that extends all the way up into adulthood. And I don't know if you remember your early 20s. Did you make any bad decisions in your 20s? The frontal cortex is not really mature until probably 25. And strangely, education seems to leave off for most people around age 21. I'm not sure why that is. I think it's a mistake. I think we need to somehow address these folks who are still plastic, but out of most traditional education. And the people who are still in formal education at age 22 to 25 are usually deep in disciplinary expertise for, grad school. And that tends not to be, you can't get a PhD in just being a good person, right? So we need to extend the educational program to slightly later years, not 50 or whatever, but a little bit later. So a few words about trends and projections. I won't belabor this, but over the last 10 years, you can see a variety of things changing in the educational landscape. I think there's been a shift from content to concepts and habits. I think that's good. There needs to be more of a shift from lecture to active learning. Lecture is a great way to teach. It's convenient for professors, and it is terrible for students. That needs to change completely. I think education has been mostly focused on producing scholars going back to the 11th century, and it's shifting toward producing people who can actually do things in the world. I think that's a good trend. Shifting from pure to applied is another way of saying the same thing. We're shifting from standardized education, one size fits all, more or less, to highly customized, highly individualized education. That's a mixed blessing. I could talk about that a little bit more. I sort of already mentioned it, right? If we need to cohere around a set of shared values, how does that jive with a pluralistic society in which everybody can do whatever they want? A few centralized providers have given way to a huge diversity of sort of Cambrian explosion of educational providers. Some of them are opportunists. Some of them are virtuous. Most of them are going to go extinct. Some of them will lead to really interesting new approaches to education. Evolutionary algorithms are a great way to find new solutions in design space. And then there's been a shift from offline to online for a lot of reasons, right? Access is a nice one. It's in this realm that I think the greatest opportunities lie, not just online, but what I'll just summarize under the heading of science of learning. And this has two pieces. One is sort of about the active learning piece. Education can actually use now what has been learned from cognitive psychology to design better activities for students so they can learn. We've tried to do this at Minerva. We're not the only ones doing active learning. This is definitively a better way of approaching student success and student learning. So that's one heading of science of learning. Another is, with all these new students coming online, we can collect a huge amount of data and figure out, what paths, where do people get confused, what's the best intervention at this point. I think that's a huge opportunity for education in the 21st century. So just to wrap up, on an even more pessimistic note, I anticipate a tension between education and free society. The world has become more free over time. This is necessary. It has to keep happening. People need more freedom. On the other hand, the totally unstructured, libertarian possibility of pursuing whatever appetites you have is, I think, hostile to our long-term sustainability needs. If you love cheeseburgers and they're for sale right over there. If everybody loves cheeseburgers, we're in big trouble. And if they're all free to pursue that, I'm not sure the world is sustainable. So, it's hard enough teaching 7.3 billion people. One of my greatest fears is, how do we teach 7.3 billion people to want the right things? So I'll leave you with that. Thanks for your attention.